Hello and welcome to the demo of dedupe.io. Dedupe.io is a tool for finding similar rows in a spreadsheet or database or linking two or more data sets together across similar fields. In this demo, I'm going to give a basic overview of how the tool works and walk you through the 5-step process we have for uploading your data, identifying some training data, and providing a few yes/no examples, followed by cleaning up, reviewing, and then finally downloading and viewing your data. We'll have other videos that you'll be able to watch later for more advanced features. This one's meant to really just get you started on your very first data set. So after you've received an account, you will can go to the URL app.dedupe.io and you'll be taken to this screen. You will probably not have any data sets when you're first starting, and so you'll see something that looks just like this. We'll go ahead and click this big blue button that says Get Started. So the very first step in the process is uploading your data. So dedupe needs to have some data to work with, which you'll be uploading here. The data needs to be in the format of either Excel file or comma-separated value. A kind of good rule of thumb would be you can open it up in Excel or in LibreOffice or a spreadsheet tool. You can open it up in dedupe. So before we get to that, though, we'd like to name our project. For this project, for this demo, I'll be showing off a data set called Early Childhood Locations. You can also give it a description. Early Childhood Education in Chicago. This is actually a spreadsheet that we worked on for another project that we wanted to create a directory of early childhood education centers somewhere in Chicago, anywhere in Chicago. But to do this, we needed to find the source of data to populate that directory. We ended up finding several sources, in fact, about 7 of them all told, from state agencies, city agencies, nonprofits, academic institutions, and decided that we should just throw them all together in one big spreadsheet and see where they agreed. So what we have here is actually a spreadsheet, and I can show you what it looks like, that has rows, each row representing a particular location, and we have things in it like the address, the name of the place, zip code, phone number, fax number, and then some additional details about the actual program. Many of them are blank. So we actually have in this spreadsheet about 3,000 different rows, but after going through and running this through a deduplication process, we found that there's actually only about 1,300 that are actually truly unique. So what we're going to do is, by the end, find those unique clusters of records. So I have my file here. I'm going to go ahead and select it. earlychildhoodlocations.csv, and it'll be uploaded. Also, a quick note on formatting. As you saw in my spreadsheet, the first row is the titles or the names of each column. That's important to have so we know what fields we're looking at. And then every subsequent row after that is the data that we're going to be deduplicating. If you're uploading data and it has sort of some extra additional header rows in it, you're going to want to delete those before you upload it to dedupe, because otherwise it'll trip it up a little bit. So it's done uploading, so we can go ahead and click next and move on to our next step. The next step here is telling which fields we want dedupe to pay attention to in terms of determining duplicates or similar records. If you remember back at our spreadsheet, we have several columns in here, but actually quite a few of them we don't care about for determining if things are the same or not. Things like what the source was, or this sequential ID, which is really not going to help us. But things that will help us are things like the site name, the address, the zip code, the phone number. Other things like the program name and length of day, those are not going to be useful enough for us to identify duplicates. So in this screen, we're going to tell dedupe which columns to pay attention to. In this drop-down list, you'll actually see those same column names listed here. So I'm going to pick site name. And over here, we are telling it telling dedupe how we want it to compare fields. So in this case, it's the best answer, and this is actually just generally true if you don't have a general clue about how you want to compare things, the default comparator is actually very good. And all it really does is it compares how similar a text is to another piece of text. We have additional comparators like address and name, which are, if you know it's an address that you're looking at or a name field, it could be a person name or a company name, then it's good to use those. We have some more advanced types of comparators, but we're going to not cover those in this particular video. So I'll pick default. One of the really powerful things about dedupe is you can actually use multiple columns to figure out if things are the same or not. And so in this case, we want to do that. We want to add another field to compare. So we're going to use site name, but we're also going to use phone number. That's a very good indication as to whether or not this location is the same. We'll also use the default comparator there as well. And then finally, we're going to use the address. So you'll see in this particular dropdown, we actually have address and zip code. So we have address information in multiple columns. We've found that it's actually best for addresses, and actually this goes for names as well, to combine them all together and then use one of our comparators to be able to properly compare things. So in this case, I'm going to take address, and then I'm going to click this little plus here and add zip code. So it's actually going to join these two columns together, and then I'm going to pick the address comparator. If I had, and I've seen this many times, you could have street name, street direction, street number, city, state, zip, that kind of thing. You can combine all of those in using this tool over here. And the order does matter, so putting them in the format that makes the most sense, sort of sequentially, makes the most sense here. So address followed by zip. So I think those are all the fields I'm going to use here for comparing everything, and so I'll hit next. So what it's doing now is it's actually going in and looking at all of our data, and based on the fields we've told it to pay attention to, it's going to find some records that it thinks are the same. So here it's already found something. This is what is called the active learning part, or the machine learning part of dedupe. We're actually going to be giving it simple feedback, yes or no, or unsure answers on whether or not two records are the same or not. And based on that, dedupe is going to start learning which fields to pay the most attention to and how to best deduplicate or identify duplicates in your data set. For this step, we're going to want 10 yeses and 10 nos as a minimum. And we've found that just over time, that getting a good number of yeses and nos is a great way to kind of get a good feel of your data. You don't want to do too few because you could learn the wrong things early on. And in doing more is fine. In fact, we encourage people to do more training. But everything after sort of the first 10 or 20, you're going to get less and less value out of. So we set that minimum, but by all means, you can train more. So in this case, we have a pretty easy answer. We have two things that have matching across all three fields. We indicate by color, green versus red, if this text matches exactly or not. So in this case, I'll say these are the same. So I'll say yes. Now it's giving us another record to look at. They have different phone numbers, different addresses, and it looks like different names. So this is clearly a no. So I'll say no here. It's going to keep asking me, and the active learning part of this is it's actually every time I give it an answer, it's going to go back and recalculate and figure out which is the records pairing that I'm the least sure about. And so it's going to continue to keep asking us and the question that'll give us the pair of records that it's going to learn the most from. This one looks like a no as well. Here's a good one. Phone number matches. The address is actually the same, although slightly different, with a period after the S, and then Catholic Charities, it's clearly the same place, but you can see slightly different variations in how the name is written down. So that's a yes. This one also seems to be a yes, very similar kind of match. Go ahead and say no here. I'll say no here. If I make a mistake, I can go back and undo it and change my answer. So there's not too much of a risk if you make a mistake. This looks like a yes. This looks like a yes as well. So we're getting up there. We've got 5 yeses and 5 nos so far, so not too much further to go. Family outreach. Yep, this looks like a yes. So you'll see here that sometimes all the fields match or just some of the fields match it. And so that's where really looking at multiple fields gets very powerful, is you can rely on multiple pieces of information to figure out whether or not things are the same. This looks like a yes as well. This is a no. Okay, almost there. We have enough no's, just need a few more yeses. Aha, Tiny Tots Villa. Okay, just a couple more. Okay, great. So yes. So now that I've gotten enough yeses and nos, I can actually skip ahead. It lets me click on the next button. I can keep training if I'd like to, and I would actually encourage folks to train more, especially if the data set is kind of tricky. And the more, like I said, the more training you give it, the better results it's going to have. But for the purposes of this demo, we'll just go ahead and skip ahead to the next step. So what it's doing now is it's actually kicked us back out to the home screen, and it's processing right now. So what it's doing is it's taking the training data that we gave it, and it's applying that to the rest of our data to come up with a first pass at what it thinks the clusters of similar records are. This step could take, in this case, it'll probably take a matter of 30 seconds or so. Larger data sets will take, oh, it's already done. Larger data sets will take longer, it could go up to several hours, depending on how many rows you have, especially if you get into the hundreds of thousands or millions of rows, which dedupe does support. There's just longer wait time in between. So now that it's done processing, we have the option to go and continue our task again. So we'll go back in. Here we have step 3, which is reviewing the clusters that it's found. So based on the training data we gave it, dedupe has found, in this case, 749 clusters for us to review. If you look over here to the right, you'll actually see that it says there are 405 of them that it's uncertain about. We built this as also an active learning and machine learning step into dedupe as well. Some folks we found really do care about reviewing every cluster they found, and so we give folks the option to do that. We also give people the option to, if they feel confident about the matches it's found, we can actually automatically skip and accept everything it's found. We'll hold off on doing that for a little bit and look at a couple of these clusters and see if they look good. So in this case, clearly the same address, phone number is missing on one of them, but this is clearly the same location, right? And you can already start seeing the sort of fuzzy matching that it's already doing for us. So I'm going to say these look good. If I don't think any of them look good, I can uncheck the box and I can say these things don't match, and it'll adjust accordingly. But in this case, they look like it's a good match, so I'll say merge. Here's another example, same address, same name. That looks like yes. You'll notice that while this number is only going down incrementally, because we've given it some positive feedback already, it's becoming much more certain as to how many clusters, how certain they are on the clusters. So as you'll see, as we keep merging, unless we say no, that number will go up. If I uncheck something and say that this is in fact no, not a match, that uncertainty will go up. So this one looks pretty good here. Yep, this one looks good too. You can see how it even handles the case of switching the name, first name, last name for the name, that location. Yep, this looks like a yes. Stony Island, yep. So we're actually getting down to, here's a great example where you see the name is very long in some cases and very short in others. It still finds it. We're getting down to it's being pretty certain about the records that we're showing here. Okay. So I've actually gotten it down to 0, and I could, like I said, keep reviewing the rest, but for this, I'm going to skip ahead. So you have two options down here, accept the remaining or reject the remaining. I want to accept the remaining. I want it to basically click the merge clusters and select everything for the remaining 738. It's going to give you a warning because this is sort of doing a lot of work for you, and we want to make sure that you don't accidentally click that button. So we'll get this confirmation and say yes, accept. So it kicks us back out to the home page again because it has some more learning to do. The subsequent step, step 4, is now that we know what the clusters are, and we have a very good confidence as to whether or not they're correct or not based on the review and validation we just did, we actually can go back and look at all of the records that we never matched to a cluster the first time around. Now that we have these idea of these clusters, we have much more information that we can go back and find these sort of orphaned records and see if they match these new clusters that we now know about. So we're going to go ahead and do that as soon as it finishes processing here. Okay, it's done, and we're going to go ahead and click Continue Task. So on this screen, we have a record sort of shaded in yellow that has not been matched to anything. And then we have a record below, which actually represents a cluster that we've already identified. And it's asking us, oh, this looks similar. Do you want to join this record to this cluster? In this case, yes, I think so, because the address matches, the name matches, although the phone doesn't match, which is maybe why it wasn't included the first time. But I think that this looks good enough. We have agreement on 2 of the 3 fields. If we're sort of not sure still, we can actually click this Show Record Details button, and it can actually show us all of the records, all of the details of that record, which we could potentially then use to identify and match. So I'll go ahead and collapse that though. This looks good, so I'll match this. Here's another one. This looks good. This looks good as well. In this case, what we're doing is actually, I'm going to tell it to match this record and then merge these 2 clusters all at the same time. So it's actually doing 3 actions right here, which is kind of nice. This one looks good. And I'll also make a note that as you're reviewing this, Dedupe is going to find the records that match based on what you tell it. So it's going to be as good at identifying duplicates as you are. So if you're unsure about something, then Dedupe is going to basically replicate your knowledge about this across all the different records. So we really encourage that the people who are doing this actual reviewing are the people who have the most knowledge or are closest to the data itself and can really make those judgment calls as to whether or not things are the same. In some cases, that actually can mean going to Google and searching up an address and maybe double checking that it's actually the same place, or Googling a name and actually double checking it's the same place. That doesn't always work because not everything's listed on Google, but in a lot of cases, you can really determine, especially with company names, you can find that, oh, maybe they had a change in name over a period of time, and you can find that online sometimes pretty quickly. Okay, so I think I'm working through this and we're just about done. These all look pretty good. So I'll go ahead and say, all right, we got to do that and it's done. So now we're going to be reviewing the very last step, which is the final review, which is taking all of the clusters that we have seen and checking them against each other. So in some cases, as we saw in the previous step, we found clusters, but there's actually an opportunity to merge those clusters together if they're similar enough. So in this case, we'll go ahead and open that up. And it's found us 2 clusters that it thinks it might be the same. So Fuller and then Chicago Public Schools Fuller, right? So these are clearly the same. So we'll go ahead and merge those. And this step should look very similar to steps 3 and 4, where we're really just kind of reviewing. Should be pretty good. There's 35 to review, but like I showed on the other page, there's a few that it's uncertain about. In this case, these are looking pretty good. So I'll go ahead and accept the rest. Okay, great. So it's processing a little bit, and then once it's done processing, it will be done, and we can actually take a look at our results. So you'll see quickly here, it's found 1,300 clusters, and we'll go ahead and open up the browser. So now that we've deduplicated it and it's finished, we can review the results we found. So here we have a list, sort of sorted by number of records that belong to each cluster. And so we can see at a glance, here are some of the clusters that it found, some of the biggest clusters. I can actually click into each one of these. We've given it each one a unique ID. And you can actually view here all the records that belong to that cluster. you can actually see who the reviewer was that made the decision, when it was done, and then the reason why. So in this case, I'd clicked the bulk accept button. In other cases, it was an exact match, and so dedupe just magically decided to put them together because they are exact matches on the fields we looked at. So we built this piece of it because we wanted people to be able to view the reason behind why every record has been added. If there are multiple people reviewing, you'll be able to see that on here. You can actually furthermore clean up the data. If it looks like a cluster is incorrect, you can select the records that you think shouldn't be involved in that cluster, and then you can remove them. It'll pull those 3 out and actually create a new cluster out of them. Okay, going back to here, we can actually search our data as well. I could look for the word Logan and find all our records that have the word Logan in them. Similar to the other screen that I showed you, you can actually merge clusters based on these searches as well. So in some cases, we want to can even do like a final set of merging. Then finally, if we're done with that, we can actually go back and check for more duplicates. And what that will do is, if we think that the results that it's gotten us, there's still some more duplicates in there, we can go back and refine our results again with a different threshold, a lower threshold. So if we wanted to have a more lax definition of what we define as a duplicate, we can do that. So the check for more duplicates button will do that and take you basically back to the final step in the process where you can review things again. And then finally, if you want to do something with your data, which I'm sure you do, you can click the download button and it will give you back your original data, which I can open up here. It actually downloads it as a zip file for space, and then we can open it up and we'll see the results, which in this case, what we do is we give you back your original data. We don't change it in any way, but what we do is we add a new column called cluster ID, and then we give each grouping of records a unique ID. So in this case, you can see these 4 records here we're calling the same, and you can look at the individual records and see here are the names, and here's the addresses, and here's all of our information. And we do that for all of our records. So this is a philosophy that we have with dedupe for doing what we deem is one of the hardest problems with working with data, which is finding if records are the same. And there are many, many different things you can do once you have that information. And so we make dedupe do just that piece very well. We'll probably be working on more features later on down the line that let you do more with outputting your data and format it in a way that you can use easier. So I think that's it for the demo now. Thanks again for watching, and happy deduping. Bye.